All right. Give me a second here. Okay. Good afternoon, National Museum of American History and Smithsonian colleagues and museum friends. Welcome to the Smithsonian Staff Learning Series hosted by the National Museum of American History. The series aims to explore the latest in audience research, trends, and activity so we can apply these insights to our audience work. My name is Adam Roseanne, and I'll be your host and moderator for today's talk, in which we are joined by Roy L. Austin Jr., the Vice President of Civil Rights and the Deputy General Counsel at Meta, who will speak to us today on the intersections of technology and civil rights, social media, and equality. Roy is the first to hold the VP of Civil Rights and Deputy General Counsel position in the tech industry, which is incredibly important for Meta. Previously, Roy was a partner at the law firm of Harris, Wiltshire Grannis LLP, where he primarily practiced criminal defense and civil rights litigation. He also has experience as an honors trial attorney with the criminal section of the Civil Rights Division, where he investigated and prosecuted hate crime and police brutality cases around the country. Deputy Assistant Attorney General, Civil Rights Division, U.S. Department of Justice, where he supervised the criminal section and the Special Litigation Section's law enforcement, police departments, corrections, juvenile justice portfolio. And as a White House Domestic Policy Council's Deputy Assistant to the President for the Urban Affairs, Justice, and Opportunity, where he co-authored a report on big data and civil rights, worked with the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing, helped develop the Police Data Initiative, worked on the expansion of reentry assistance, and was a member of President Obama's My Brother's Keepers Task Force. Certainly the right person for today's talk. Please note that today's discussion is being recorded with closed captioning, and I will be helping our speaker by moderating the chat. So please add your questions there. And lastly, I'd like to hear from you. Please take a moment today or tomorrow and share your thoughts on the series, past speakers, and your ideas for the future. Thank you, and please join me in welcoming our today's speaker. Roy, the floor is yours. We're honored to have you.
So thank you so much, Adam. I really appreciate this opportunity, and I hope that we have a lively discussion here. Let me just start off by telling you a little bit about my role, because it is the only such role in corporate America, and that is Vice President of Civil Rights. So approximately 5 years ago, Meta, which was then known as Facebook, engaged in a civil rights audit run by Laura Murphy, who was a executive with the ACLU in Washington, D.C., and the Relman Colfax law firm in Washington, D.C. Over the next 2 years, Ms. Murphy and Relman Colfax came up with about 117 different suggestions for Meta on how Meta could better protect civil rights as a company. One of their recommendations was the creation of this role, this Vice President of Civil Rights role. Now, Meta already had a DEI leader, and the role of VP of Civil Rights is different. It is a role that is steeped in civil rights law, in anti-discrimination, in anti-hate, and making sure that all have equal access to the platform and are treated the same on the platform. I was fortunate enough to get the role, and immediately I set to figuring out what this was. To be clear, there are no examples of what this role is, and so really was just trying to figure out what is the best place for this role at a company like Meta. I came up with 5 pillars of work for us to do. Those are hate speech and law enforcement, one; another one, technology; another one, voting and civic engagement; another one, policy; and another one, product. And so those roles I have as my head of hate and civic engagement, a woman by the name of Cynthia Deedle, who spent 22 years with the FBI, including the vast majority of that time leading the civil rights unit for the FBI. I have as the head of technology, Susan Epstein. Susan Epstein is a lawyer and someone who taught computer science at Stanford. I have as the head of voting and civic engagement a woman named Rita Bosworth. Rita is a former federal defender who went on to run a voting rights organization in the Bay Area. At the head of policy, I have a woman named Ruchika Hodel. Ruchika It was a long time. She's the only person who was not brought in just to join the civil rights team. She has about 5 years of time at Meta. And then at the head of product, a woman named Julie Wenna. Julie comes from the Obama administration, the First Lady's office, and then more recently with Airbnb, where she was part of their civil rights audit. And then we have as our legal counsel, Manar Waheed. Manar Waheed is an immigration lawyer, a former domestic violence lawyer, and someone who was also coming from the ACLU. In these pillars, just to give you a very general idea, and you know, Adam or anyone else, just jump in if you have any questions. I don't want to talk at you for this entire hour. So just to give you a sense of the work on these different pillars. For voting and civic engagement, before we arrived at Meta during the 2020 election, Facebook helped approximately 4 million people register to vote. Part of the process is figuring out, well, what do we do? What do we put on our platform around election time? Part of it is, how do we deal with disinformation and misinformation about voting, really time, place, manner of voting? And now what's in the news mostly in this space is, what do we do with things like deep fakes, deep visual fakes, deep audio fakes, false information that is put on our platform? We recently asked, or the oversight board recently said that they are going to look into this matter. Oversight board is a group of outside experts who are able to weigh in on our policies and practices. To give you a sense of our work in the law enforcement and hate crime space, law enforcement, we have found that there are law enforcement agencies who falsely use our platform as a way to investigate cases. So, for example, we recently sent a letter to the Los Angeles Police Department because they were infiltrating activist movements using false names on our platform, and told them that that is actually not allowed on Facebook. You are not allowed to use a fake name on Facebook. In addition to that, dealing with things like anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, anti-Asian violence or anti-Asian hate that is showing up on the platform, and what's not, are areas that Cynthia covers. And I'll just go to one more example, just again to give you the kind of the broad sense of the work we're doing. We recently had what we call Connect, which is when the company tells the world about its newest products and its newest technologies. Part of Connect was the release of stickers, would be one thing. Also the release of a chat bot. We as a civil rights team, and Susan Epstein in particular, were very closely involved in how do we make sure that these chat bots that we have, that these stickers that we have, are both not presenting hate, but also how to make sure that they are being as inclusive as possible. Quick example. If you just go on the deep web right now, if you just go on an internet that is not filtered right now and you ask for photos or stickers of doctors, you are likely to get 4 white men. Not only is that inaccurate, but it is also harmful to communities where you have doctors representative of other communities. The question becomes, how do you make sure that you are in fact getting diverse images? Take it the other way. How do you take something like criminal, and again, unfiltered web, you're going to get black faces and brown faces almost exclusively with the term criminal. How do you make sure that that is not what our systems are doing? So that is a piece of our work. In addition, how do you make sure that you cannot search something, or what should be the response of a chatbot if you search something like, how do I make sure that an immigrant doesn't rent my apartment? That is in fact illegal. That is a violation of the Fair Housing Act. How do we make sure, how do we train our chatbot such that it is not presenting these kinds of illegal answers? And how do we do it in a way that encourages people to keep digging, keep looking for good quality information, while at the same time not presenting them with information that helps to facilitate a crime. So that is the kind of work that we have very recently been doing in the technology space. So I'll stop there, just to see if there are any questions. I can talk about this work forever because we are a company that touches 3.75 billion monthly users, which is approximately half the world. And so there isn't an issue that is going on in the world that we do not somehow have to touch.
So just ask for any questions in the chat while our guest here continues. This is already so fascinating, and I imagine it's both a lot of trial and error learning, but also I'm assuming for colleagues here, it's about how does Facebook and Meta point folks to the right sources of information, such as the Smithsonian, American History, Natural History, Air and Space, and our partner history in civic organizations. So how does that fit in terms of Meta's ability to point audiences to those things, whether they ask illegal questions, such as your example about, how do you prevent something? So it's a need to say, this is illegal, but let's get you the right information. Or is it just saying you can't ask that and ensuring that the bot doesn't just come back with a erroneous answer?
So, it's a little bit of both there. Is, do you tell someone, what you're asking is a crime, get off this system, or, when they ask something that you pretty don't like, you're a racist, you're a misogynist, you shouldn't be on here, as opposed to, do we use it as a potential teaching moment, and direct people to good quality information? And good quality information is really, that is one of the challenges. It's a challenge that Google has. It's a challenge that any search engine has, and it is a matter of really figuring out where are the accurate places where you can find information like the Smithsonian's and what's not, and how do we direct our systems to go to those places. Now, look, this is not easy work, and this is not without controversy, because there are people out there who would say, well, that organization that you want to send this to is an organization that is partisan, is an organization that we don't believe them, it's an organization that leans a certain political direction. But at some point, you do have to send people somewhere, and you have to make decisions as to where you're going to send them, or where you're going to gather your information from. So, for example, when we don't want to go to white supremacist sites to be gathering information to then be using that for our chatbots to be trained on and what's not. We don't want to be going to terrorist sites. We know those sites exist as places to be sending information to. So a lot of it is also looking to see the quality of certain sites, and there are just some sites that you're not going to go to. An issue that we have seen is the sexualization of women, largely as a result of the amount of porn that is all over the internet. How do we make sure that our chatbots, when you ask for a photo of a woman, are not going through the porn sites to figure out what that woman should look like? And so it is a filtering mechanism where we're saying that is not a good quality place to go, and we send our chatbots to different places to gather good information, to gather more appropriate information, to gather less sexist, racist, homophobic information. But those decisions have to be made at some point by someone.
Yeah. My colleague Aaron Roy asks a question: does Meta want to be a company that protects basic civil rights, or a company that leads in the realm of advancing civil rights? I know Meta isn't a nonprofit or a charity, but I'm curious if it does have kind of a mission statement or vision re civil rights. Thanks for the question, Aaron. And please follow Aaron's lead and put your questions in the chat. Roy, what do you think?
Yeah. So great question, Aaron. And I don't know that they're, so, our as a mission statement, the mission of the company is to bring the world closer together, to be a place for community to lift voice. Now, the fact that it has the only civil rights team indicates to me that it is a company that cares deeply about civil rights. But civil rights is both a defensive posture and an offensive posture. And I think that, we do a little bit of both. One is, so when I'm trying to protect communities, I've defined historically and systemically marginalized communities as communities defined by race, religion, national origin, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, and disability. There are across the world a lot of different groups. You have caste, you have pregnancy, you have income. As a way of, the team that I have is quite small, and so as a way of limiting what our team covers and being realistic in what we can look at, I've limited it to the 8 areas that I mentioned before. We do things in a defensive way where we are constantly looking at how are our products impacting these communities and what can we do to make sure that they are not harming these communities. But we also look for these things in an offensive way. Offensive being bad, but offensive being like your sports offense. So, for example, we have what we call Ray-Ban stories, which are our smart glasses, and we are updating those constantly. Well, the smart glasses have the capability of having someone walk into a room. The glasses will pick up what is in that room and do a voice description of what's in that room. As you can imagine, that is an amazing product for people who are sight impaired. So it will tell you, you have 2 pictures in this room. The one is a picture of a boat, one is a picture of a horse. You have books in this room. There are XYZ people in this room. And so the glasses are able to do that. And so that is a way in which our technology and our products are being used in an offensive way. Another thing we do is we recently had we created an experience in a mosque. So we have virtual reality. And so one of the things that we did is this was done by my colleague Manar Wahid, is they went into a mosque in LA during Ramadan. And you go in, and the VR experience, for those of you who have not experienced it, is a completely immersive experience. You actually kind of lose yourself in the VR equipment. Even though you're standing in the middle of your living room, you actually feel like you're transported to where the VR images are. So you walk into this mosque during a Ramadan prayer, and you're like, huh, all they're doing is people are praying, and they're praying to God, and it has captioning and everything else. And we see this as a way to demystify. Everybody's like, oh, what's going on in that mosque? It must be something suspicious. And in fact, we use it to demystify where people can go in and experience this and be like, oh, this is like so many other religious institutions. Pretty amazing that's really all it is at the end of the day. And so we use it in that way as well. So I don't know that I would say, one more than the other. I think it's important for us to be doing both. And as a company, we've clearly made civil rights something that we care deeply about.
Roy, one question for you, and we just had another question come in. You mentioned your 5 pillars, but clearly education is super important to you and to the work that you just shared with that really interesting example and your previous one. Well, I wonder if you can just talk a little bit why you weren't more deliberate in saying we should have a 6th pillar, which is education, so that people can have experiences such as the mosque, which is really kind of an amazing use of that. And now you answer that, and we'll do a few more questions because now they're coming in, which is great.
Yeah. So now, part of why I didn't create an education pillar is simply bandwidth. It is something that I care very, very deeply about, but as I noted before, my team is quite small. But I think education runs through everything we're doing. When I'm fighting misinformation and disinformation, part of it is because of the harm that it does to marginalized communities. But part of it is also that as a culture, we do need a basis in fact. We do need to have some set of truths that we are all operating under. And I think it's incredibly important that come from verified, from credible sources. Again, sources like the Smithsonian. And let me just say, I'm a huge Smithsonian fan. I've been in DC for 25 plus years. My kid, I went to the Smithsonian as a high school kid. We came to Air and Space on a tour. I have done many of the museums, everything from the Native American Museum to, of course, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, just a huge believer in that experience. One thing that VR can do is it can actually take you into a museum. I know that you would probably prefer to have feet on the ground and people walking through the museums, but you can also have an experience where VR takes someone into your museums. Again, education is a huge part of what we're doing. I've been thinking a lot about, as we move toward these attacks on books and attacks on education, what we as a company could be doing in these spaces. I don't have any great answers for anyone at this moment, but it is something that I care about deeply. How do you get access to books, access to ideas, using our technologies, as opposed to those technologies limiting people's possibilities?
Great. Thank you. Emily Frost asks, I'm wondering how Meta grapples with defining what good is, as you mentioned before, the example of pictures of women. In the end, it's humans making these decisions, not the algorithm.
Look, this is thank you for the question, Emily. It is one of the most challenging things that we do every single day. Is what is the right answer? What is good? What is bad? What do we give people more of in their feeds, and what do we give people less of in their feeds? And ultimately, it is a decision. And here's what I want folks to understand is that it isn't like we walked in, like the internet, we walked into a blank slate and people just started, everyone, all diverse people coming from all worlds and all ideas came in and very appropriately put in the things that they believe in and care about the most. The internet is at its core a very limited set of information. I don't know, for those of you who may not know this, Wikipedia had to go out and recruit authors from marginalized communities because they realized that everything was being done from a very Western perspective. And so you were missing out on huge pieces of history because those people simply weren't part of the internet. When I talk about the internet being filled with harmful images of women, I'm talking about it from the fact that it is largely men who have put more material on the internet than women have, and have done so in a way that is harmful. How do you balance these things out? How do you say, well, in a perfect world, we would have, I think women are like 51% of the world, we would have 51% of content from women, 49% from men. We can't do that. We can't figure out a way to do just that. So we are constantly evaluating. And then you also just have the concept of free speech, but even free speech has its limitations. We have what we call our community standards, which is about 20 different standards. No hate speech, no bullying, no copyright violations. We ban dangerous organizations and individuals from using our platforms. These are all standards that we had to come up with, a set of rules that we had to come up with as a company, that are constantly being thought about and revised and everything else. One thing many of you have heard is, as a company, Mark Zuckerberg has said, we would be happy with regulation. That is not a lie. We have had to come up with the rules that we operate under for the most part. I mean, there's some places where, it's just so clearly against the law. For example, something we call CSAM, child sexual abuse. It's child sexual abuse images. I can't remember what the M in the acronym is at the moment. Oh, material. Sorry, child sexual abuse material, which is just against the law. But in other places, it's us who have had to balance these things. And let me not disparage the U.S. Congress, but let's just say it hasn't moved quickly in these areas. We've seen a lot more regulation coming out of the EU. And if we are regulated and someone else gives us a set of rules, we will follow those set of rules. I mentioned earlier the oversight board. So we created a board of experts from around the world who are able to weigh in on our policies. This is a board who told us when we removed President Trump from our platform, they came back and said, what is the basis for you having done so? You need to create a set of rules for how you're going to treat world leaders on your platform so that you're making decisions not on a case-by-case basis, but based on policies that you have. So this is an outside board that works on our policies on a regular basis. And again, I think I just mentioned one of the cases they're working on right now, and they're accepting comment on, and feel free to reach out to them and comment on it, is what should we do with deep fakes of politicians? This is one, I can't remember exactly which one this is, but we've seen a bunch of these recently, everything from Donald Trump hugging Anthony Fauci, which never in fact happened, to giving Nancy Pelosi a different voice on our platform. And so how should we deal with these things? What are the markers to tell people who are seeing them that these are not real images? How do we do all of this in real time? Sorry, very long answer to your question there, Emily.
I'm following up with some of the speakers, some of those who are asking questions. So just right back to me. One question for you it's kind of similar to what one of my colleagues asked. What is it that we can do? How do we better support these efforts? What's the role of organizations, the social media staff of organizations like ours in getting out this content, especially with some of this fake and hurtful things that will happen during Pride Month, Black History Month. And so we're trying to find that balance, especially with this line of allowing people to do and share versus crossing that line. I wonder if you can kind of speak to that.
I mean, it's a really hard question. I mean, one is, just you decide how you're going to use your platform. Understand how to drive, make sure that the content you put on your platform is obviously it's going to be informative, but how do you actually drive eyes to that content, drive usage of that content? Because the more engaging your content is, the more it is going to be used, the more people who are going to be there and on it. As far as these debates on misinformation and disinformation and what's not, I think really it is for you and your research community just to continue to do the research. When things are fake and false and not grounded in history and truth, I'm not telling you guys to become professional fact checkers, but in your storytelling and in your decisions as to how to present history, make sure you're answering the question not just as to what is in fact history, but what is simply rumor, what has actually been debunked. Note those things as well, so that people understand that the Smithsonian is a place to go to for truth. I'm not sure what else. I mean, another thing is, I would say, look, one thing we helped promote, it's not something that the civil rights team did, but we promoted something for the March on Washington. And so the idea was to encourage people to get involved in housing issues and voting issues and policing issues. How do you create content for a world that is moving more and more toward virtual and augmented reality, and create that content and look at kind of the gamification of technology, and how do you do that as opposed to kind of just a recitation of facts?
Right.
But how do you engage younger audiences so that they are coming to you as a source? I am positive that what I just said is not new to a single person on here. As you sit there every single day saying, okay, so we have this amazing exhibit. How do I draw people to this exhibit? Right. But thinking about how do you do that in virtual reality or augmented reality.
I'm going to stay on this theme for a little bit with my colleague Talia's question. What's your advice for social media managers at the National Park Service or the Smithsonian who are trying to post educational content but see a lot of hate speech in the comment sections, especially during Heritage Months? We can't delete hateful comments because of the First Amendment, but we want to continue to provide educational content.
Yeah, I think, and I've seen this in newspapers as well. I think there's a real question as to what is the value of comments. As much as it is great to have, people say, "Oh, that was an amazing and wonderful exhibit," you're going to get a lot of nonsense there. And as I guess as a government organization, you don't have the ability to remove that. Certainly not in the way that we can. I don't know what the value of comments is. I'm not sure what the value of emojis is. I actually recently
I don't either.
I've been in debates because I'm a big supporter of women's sports. I coach a girls soccer team in my spare time, and I see a post on Facebook about the WNBA finals, and you see a bunch of guys go on there and make make derogatory statements about them, or they put up the laughing emoji mocking someone's performance. And I just don't know if it really if it's worth it to even have those emojis to allow for the commentary as opposed to just presenting stuff. I know it creates a certain level of engagement, but it's also so much of it is so nonsensical and hurtful that I think at some point you kind of have to say, we're going to turn off comments or something like that. Look, and the other thing you have to look at is some of this is just, one person's opinion, but obviously we've also found that a lot of this is also manipulated, where you have organizations, groups, nation states who enjoy creating more division in the United States, certainly, or countries around the world, and actually organize to go on these platforms to post really hateful, hurtful commentary. If you look at, this is the whole thing with the anonymity of social media, of the internet. You have all the keyboard warriors that have been created here. How do we balance that out? How do we make sure that when someone is actually on these sites, that they are who they say they are, that they're actually asking a reasonable question about something as opposed to just trolling? Look, it's a debate we deal with all the time. I just, I think you have to decide whether it's worth it to have the comments, knowing that you're going to get a certain number of comments that are based in really pure ignorance and hate.
I'm going to try to combine two questions. Thank you for that answer. I'm going to try to combine two questions. We've collected a lot of around COVID and different things. And when we post on Facebook and we use the word COVID, oftentimes we feel that it might limit the reach of our post. Maybe it's getting flagged or sensitive content. Can you comment on if that's true and how civil rights might fit into that? Also, what happens if the Smithsonian flags something on Meta on a platform that we think is inappropriate, and it comes to you when it comes to your office or your colleagues? You can speak about that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
So I am not aware. So I know there's a debate going on right now with Threads and our search tool, and whether or not if you post stuff about COVID, we don't allow people to search for that. At the same time, if you follow people who talk about COVID, whether those are doctors or other medical professionals or researchers, you can follow them and they can post as much as they want to on COVID, and those will be the first things that show up in your feed. So I'm not aware of us taking down anything at all related to COVID. Now, if it is deemed misinformation, what we do is we demote it. This is the idea of unless something is in fact a violation of the law or a violation of our community standards, we generally do not remove it entirely, but we reduce the reach of that. And so we demote it. And so you are less likely, if you spend, if the first stuff on your feed is not going to include stuff that we consider misinformation. We also work with an enormous number of third-party fact checkers. We send them information. If they tell us that something is false, that is the kind of thing that turns out to cause that post to be demoted. And so we do that kind of work. Now, I believe a part of your question was, how does that deal with civil rights? Well, look, we know that COVID disinformation and misinformation impacts marginalized communities more than other communities. So for me, misinformation and disinformation is a civil rights issue because it's affecting communities, marginalized communities, more so than other communities. So for me, the fight to remove bad information and make sure that these communities are receiving good information is a civil rights fight, and it's part of my regular discussions with people in the company on why I feel so strongly about misinformation, disinformation, to the point that I'm like, look, depending on how we set up our filters, you can end up removing good information or allowing bad information at different levels. There's no perfect place to land those filters. And in some cases, I would say, and this is me speaking, this is me as the VP of Civil Rights speaking, this is not, and everything I'm saying here is really from me. This is not, I'm not giving you the company line on these things in general. I'm telling you how I personally feel. That's something that I'm allowed to do in my job here. But I would prefer that we have and allow less speech in order to protect communities from the ill effects of bad speech. Now, I'm a big believer in freedom of expression and freedom of speech. These are decisions that our company makes because we're not a government organization. I recognize that movements are based on the ability to speak. Arab Spring was based on the ability to speak. The George Floyd protest, the greatest single protest movement across the entire world, was based on and allowed because we have free expression here in the United States. But I also recognize that if you look at these things the other way, and misinformation and disinformation is, if that's the first thing someone sees, that's often the first thing someone believes, and that causes enormous trouble and heartache and pain, and sometimes violence as well.
This is a great conversation. Roy, we have a lot of social media managers here. This is some of the best in the field from our various branches on the chat. And we're talking a lot about misinformation, disinformation. I wonder if you can speak a little bit more specifically from your point of view on the work that we can do to continue to put out good information on civil rights and on our different stories and histories, so we can get that out there. But then how does Meta partner or utilize that information? There are some folks who aren't social media managers, so it might be a little rudimentary, but if you could just talk about what's the connection between what you do and your colleagues and that what we do, and therefore how can we work differently, if not better, to better get this content out there?
One thing that we do is and you have no shortage of this, is we employ experts. Look, we recognize that we don't have every single answer, and so maybe one thing to make sure is that when we are having these conversations, that people who are working with the Smithsonian are part of these conversations. We go out and talk to academics and researchers and practitioners all the time when we have an issue that we're trying to figure out. And these discussions are incredibly important and incredibly deep and difficult. And I think it would be a huge thing if, the people you rely on for your information, as you're figuring out, well, what happened in this community 100 years ago, you bring on the historians, you have your historians, you bring on your historians to be part of that discussion. It'd be great if you shared those people with a Meta and encouraged us to talk to them as we're trying to decide what is mis and disinformation. The other thing is also to figure out, and I don't know the areas that the Smithsonian does this, is, we really want to be data-based. We want to be data-driven, evidence-based. And what that means is, look, someone could use the N-word, all right? What is the harm in doing so? how do we determine what that level of harm is? Who is doing the research to say how bad certain pieces of disinformation are or are not? Someone mentioned COVID. Well, what does it mean in real numbers for there to be COVID misinformation in the number of increased deaths that we are seeing? What does it mean for violence? Or maybe it has to be in the way of mental health and mental wellness for someone to be exposed to hate speech. What is, and as a company, again, this is saying as a company, this is how far we were as a company believing in free speech, that for a long time we allowed Holocaust denial on our platform, because the idea was, and you have the quote from the Supreme Court that basically something to the effect of truth is the disinfectant of bad speech. Well, I'm not so sure that that's been proven true, but it took a long time for folks to decide that, no, you know what? Holocaust denial is just Holocaust denial, and there is no good piece to that. But as you look at the different pieces of misinformation, what is the data or the evidence that says that allowing that out there is truly harmful? How do we make that determination, as opposed to, every day, anybody here who watches TV and you see some advertisement for some really stupid product that really doesn't work at the end of the day, is that harmful? Is that harmful to the extent that it should be taken down? Should we allow the puffery that happens? We also exempt largely political speech or speech from politicians. We do not fact check speech from politicians, because if you look left, right, middle, there's so much mis and disinformation there that is it our job to be the arbiters of that mis and disinformation. So what I would say is just do the research in your specific area. Take climate. Okay, what is the harm of having disinformation in climate? Put it into numbers. Put it into something solid that causes a platform like ours, or take any social media platform, to demote or even remove that kind of content. And how do we fill the information chamber with good information and overwhelm that bad information? And so keep posting your good stuff, keep putting it out there, because it will win the day if there's more of that than there is the bad information.
I'm going to stay on this topic a little bit. My colleague wants to preface by saying she's not a lawyer. You are. And she also says maybe this is basic, but it's right on what you're talking about. When a person signs up for Meta product and agrees to the terms of use, how does the First Amendment fit into that? What's freedom of speech mean on Facebook or Instagram? If you can comment on that, etc. And as a quasi-federal agency, we're always trying to apply our terms of use with setting off a First Amendment problem.
Yeah. So there isn't a First Amendment right with regard to social media platforms. The First Amendment is what government can tell you to do or not to do. Now, there is a case right now before the Supreme Court where Texas and Florida argue that we should not be able to moderate content in the way that we do. They say that we should not be able to make those choices. It'll be interesting to see where that lands, but as of right now, those decisions are made solely by the platforms themselves. Again, as long as it's not clearly against the law. So YouTube makes its rules, X makes its rules, we make our rules. And so that right now, there is no legal, like, we could decide tomorrow that we're going to allow all COVID misinformation. We could just decide that. We could decide tomorrow that we're going to promote white nationalist, white supremacist information. At the same time, we could do the reverse of both of those. And it is completely up to us what to do with that as the law currently stands. Now, as I noted, the EU, under the Digital Services Act, they also have the Digital Marketing Act, and they are soon to pass something called the Artificial Intelligence Act. The EU has taken a different standpoint on these things and has actually said that you have a duty as a platform to limit the amount of mis and disinformation that are on your platforms. Again, I don't know that the US Congress, as split as it currently is ever going to reach that point, but we operate all over the world. So when the EU creates rules, we have to figure out, can we actually limit our can we limit our compliance to just stuff in the EU, or is it something where we have to make a broader change across all of our platforms?
We have a thank you for that. We have an interesting comment here. This is directly to you from one of our social media managers. We're often asked in the museum space, even by our museum leadership, that there's a value in social media because of conversations that can happen there. That's one reason why comments are valuable to us, and don't turn them off like some news organizations. It's surprising to me, my colleague, that you personally feel like maybe comments aren't that valuable, or engagement and dialogue dead. Do you see Meta becoming more of a passive viewing experience versus a social experience of engagement? If so, why should cultural orgs and museums continue to be active on Meta when we have a hard time becoming more of a video producing Netflix style content producer? Roy, what do you think?
I didn't make a definitive statement that we should just cut out comments, but I do wonder the value of them. And that's just, again, my personal opinion. I mean, look, every once in a while someone engages and you're like, oh, okay, that's an interesting point. Sometimes someone engages and I suspect you go back and look and say, ooh, we actually need to clean up the way we wrote that, because that's an interesting point. But the vast majority of comments that I see are either, hooray, that's great, or you suck. And I'm just not sure that there is enormous value in that. And I want you to note that, look, if you have a social media post on something that's controversial, and I suspect this has happened to some of you who are in this space, and a left-wing or right-wing group gets a hold of that and then sends it to all of their members and encourages all of their members to bombard you with comments, that's completely artificial. That's not you like hearing from your audience and engaging in a constructive way with your audience. That is having your audience taken over by some partisan, some activist group. Look, if you're fine with that, then you're fine with that. I just, at times, I look at these comments and I really wonder, I mean, beyond engagement, is there real value to allowing a non-expert, oftentimes a person who has not even thought about something, to be able to pontificate about that at their leisure after skimming what you and your researchers have probably spent years trying to better understand? I'm going to leave that for you to decide. But I think there are probably some times when the comments are really just absolutely useless.
I think this is a great place to leave that, and a lot for us to continue to think about. And it sounds like it's an active conversation. I hopefully and if not, we'd love to hear from you on this. In 2026, it's the 250th anniversary of this nation. Opportunities for celebration, opportunities for reflection, opportunities for action, hopefully lots of positive civic action. What are ways that you all in your office and even Facebook right now may be starting to think about the nation's 250th anniversary in 2026, and ways that you would encourage us to start planning for, to engage the nation in healthy, positive dialogue, and really taking steps to really utilize Meta and other sites?
Obviously I should have known this. I can't say that I've looked that far ahead. I hadn't even thought about it, to be perfectly honest with you. I'm a 70s kid, so I guess I was born at our 200th.
We can have another
honestly,
meeting.
I will tell you in all honesty that I have not thought about that in any way, shape, or form. That is, for me, so far in the future of what I'm working on day in and day out, that I have no idea. But that's why I do these things. Is you've just raised something which now I need to take to others in the company and say 250 is a big stinking deal, and we probably need to start planning what we as a company want to do for that occasion now.
Well,
But
we have lots of folks. We have lots of folks for that topic and other topics that we should and can happily partner and assist with your efforts. Why don't you then tell us, Roy, a little bit about how the company is starting to get ready for, well, what's going on right now in the world, but also how it's starting to make plans, real plans, as we are almost a year out from a presidential election, which is already, in many ways, feels like it never ended. So what's going on your end, and how do we start thinking about what we should do in order to ready our engines for Facebook around the election, regardless of what unit at the Smithsonian?
Yeah. So the election work never ends. In part because we have elections playing out all around the world on our platform, and so it's not just the U.S. elections that we see, impacting the content on our platform. So it is all sorts of work that is happening. It is, how do we again make sure that people get quality information about time, place, and manner of voting? How do we make sure we're taking down comments and posts from people who are trying to intimidate or dissuade people from voting? How do we make sure that people aren't threatening campaign workers on our platforms, and what are all the different ways that one may in fact do that? How much do we as a company encourage voting on our platforms? How much political speech is on our platform, and how much is that disseminated? These are the kinds of things that we are talking about. And beyond voting, do we have a role in civic engagement, which is, it's one thing every 2 years, every 4 years to be involved in the election. But most of the stuff that impacts our day-to-day lives happens every day in our city councils and our county councils. What are we going to do about traffic fatalities and slowing down traffic on a particular road? What are we going to do about the latest dog park? What are we going to do about making sure that the water that's coming into our homes is healthy? How do we create an environment that really encourages that kind of speech? And part of that is just groups, and making sure that people who have like interests are able to bring together like people in groups on our platform. What's the impact of new technologies going to be on all of this? Again, generative AI and artificial intelligence has become the talk of the day, and how do we make sure that doesn't have some kind of improper impact on our elections? And so, the bottom line is it's a constant conversation. I think we have elections coming up in Brazil soon. Even every single special election, we're trying to look at to get lessons learned, to figure out what our place should be as a company with respect to elections.
We have time for a few more questions. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about audience. When I first joined, Facebook was one of the best places to actually have some of those intergenerational conversations, a place to be able to connect with colleagues, family, friends. And I wonder how it's changing. And are we still able to engage with young people today? Everyone talks about TikTok, but what is the ability for us to have those kind of conversations as individual and organizations, for some of those intergenerational, to kind of share different things among folks? And then we're going to take a question from Say before we run out of time.
Yeah, look, I think it's honestly, social media is both. Social media is that place where if I want to join a group of like individuals, I can join a group of like individuals, but it's also a way that I can learn about things that I would, and be in contact with people that I otherwise would never be in contact with. I can touch someone all the way across the world and have a conversation with them on social media. For me, again, a 70s kid, I have reconnected with people from high school who I suspect I would never, ever talk to again in life, but for Facebook. As far as content is concerned, we have Reels, which is similar to TikTok, where you have this content, and look, it's all this kind of balance. I mean, do you want more videos of someone skiing down a ski slope and wiping out, or do you want more videos of your friend's new baby? What brings you more joy and more excitement? What is the thing that you want to see more of? And
Right.
really, you can find those different channels in Facebook. But it's also a matter of, just like we choose what channel to watch on TV, and we get all of our news primarily from that channel, we can also close ourselves off and enter an echo chamber if we choose a group of people that is less diverse. But I got to tell you, I grew up in State College, Pennsylvania. For anyone there who doesn't know, that's where Penn State University is. That's where I grew up. Variety of political opinions, variety of experiences. I'm in conversation with these people more often now than I would be just living here in the Washington, D.C. area, where I've largely surrounded myself with people who served in the Obama administration or the Biden administration. So in some ways, I have a wider group of opinions than I would have but for social media. At the same time, I can also join different groups that all kind of share, are like-minded to myself. So it's a mixed bag at the end of the day.
Yeah. One of the great reasons and one of the great things about social media is what you just named. My colleague Sai asks, and this might be our final question before I say thank you, will you be increasing moderation by humans versus bots/AI? AI is already spreading misinformation. What safeguards will Meta enact to reduce that?
Yeah. So at the volume of information, we have to use AI an enormous amount. It is just too much coming in on a day-to-day basis. But we also have approximately 30,000 human content reviewers who are able to review things, and I think it's well over 150 different languages. And so we recognize the importance and nuance. And I'll stop with this. We could very easily tomorrow remove the N-word from our platform. We could simply enter it into our filter, say anytime there's their N-word, it will be removed from our platform. But we realize that actually that would hurt the community that we would be protecting supposedly more, because it is used in culture, it is used in books, it is used in music, it is used in movies. How do we capture the nuance of who is using the term, how they're using the term, and take your protected characteristic and understand how you as a protected group have adopted a word of hate to describe yourselves as a way of actually empowering you. Take whatever group you're a part of. There is nuance that computers do not get yet, and we can keep working on AI and training AI to do so, but I suspect there will always be a place for human beings to be making these decisions because they are such hard decisions to make.
Well, I think that's an amazing place to end another Smithsonian Staff Learning Series with today's great speaker. Roy, it's been an honor to have you. There's been a lot to consider, and I'm going to be talking about this talk for a long time. I'm sure a lot of us would like to follow up with you. Please do continue to reach out to the Smithsonian and staff. We are here to partner and help get good information out there. And hopefully we'll see you before 2026 in our buildings. Thank you so much. And everyone, thank you for joining us today. And we have some great upcoming programs. Do stay tuned. We do have one on censorship with the Penn Foundation, and one next week on teen tours in DC from EW. So thank you so much. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you.